on this computer.
Okay, cool.
Do you have anybody else?
Gino is trying to join, so we can wait for her. We just let her know right now, so she should be joining soon.
So why don't we start at 10:45 and we can start recording because everyone should be able to access this later anyways. So I think the main thing is just to have enough people for question period, which is probably going to be after like the 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So then it'll be fine.
Okay, let's start.
Okay.
Okay.
The first thing about getting into law school is that today is a lot different than when I went through it. When I went through, people actually got B's and C's and D's in classes instead of everyone getting A's. So it was a little bit easier to stand out. The most important thing, though, is the law school admissions test. And the test itself is a little bit different than any other kind of test I've ever taken. And I've taken a bunch of tests in my life. So what I did was I got a workbook and I scheduled an hour a day to do this workbook where it taught me how to take that particular test. And so when I took the exam, I just blew it away. And I remember going into my advisor's office and saying, putting the results down on the desk and saying, will this get me into law school? And he said, it's not a matter of if it will get you into law school, where would you like to go? So, and I think it also helped. I actually didn't get into the University of Texas. I applied there, but I think it does help that I wasn't the typical pre-law student. I mean, my first bachelor's is in forestry, so that stood out a little bit too. Something that's a little bit different. The thing that I wasn't prepared for in law school is the fact that the entire course comes down to one exam at the end. And that exam is purely a long essay exam. And forestry did not have a lot of essay exams. Even in the other classes that I had to take, I think I took one or two total essay exams. So if you really want to go to law school, you should major in something that will provide you an opportunity to take a lot of essay exams. And the other thing about law school is it really does change your brain. They did PET scans and MRI scans of law students before and after their first year. And the change was as dramatic as the change they saw in people who had gone through U.S. Marine Corps boot camp. You learn to think differently. Your brain starts using different parts that you're not used to. You're expected to really learn to think on your feet. You can be asked any question about any case in the reading at any time in a class, and you are expected to be able to do it. My very first class in law school was property law. And I had not prepared the classes because it was the first day. I didn't know I was supposed to have prepared stuff before I even went in the door. And the very first case, and law books are literally based on cases, and each case builds one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, which is very much how the law is. Like they told us that there's not been a new contract written in 500 years. That basically you start with the contract you have, and every time you get sued or an issue comes up, then you just add another clause to the contract. Well, my first law school class, the first case was a very famous case called Sierra Club versus Morton, where the Sierra Club sued not on behalf of their members, but on behalf of trees. So it was a foundational case on whether or not a tree had standing to sue, whether it was a legally recognized entity. And because we had filled out these forms, the professor knew that my bachelor's was in forestry. So he asked me right off the bat to do this case. And I did not want to admit in front of everybody on the first day that I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I'd never heard of this case before, obviously. So instead of talking about the case, I said, because I looked down and noticed that they were suing because of somebody was wanting to put a recreational facility into a national park, national forest. And I started talking about the Natural Resources Act, which I did know, and about how the Forest Service is legally required to manage the forest on the basis of range, recreation, wood, wildlife, and water. And while I'm talking about that, everyone in the class is flipping frantically through their book going, oh my God, I didn't read about this. What the hell is she talking about? And he let that go on for a few minutes for several reasons. Number one, he knew at this point I had not prepared the case. And he wanted to really make me feel the need to never be unprepared again. And the second was he was also making the rest of them freak out just on standing. And finally he said, calm down, everybody. The reason she's talking about this is because, you know, she's bachelor's in forestry. And so they all calmed down, and then he called on somebody else to actually talk about the case. And so it was obviously I wasn't going to talk about the case because I didn't understand, hadn't prepared it. So that's the kind of thing that happens routinely in law school. And if you can't handle being put on a spot, being put under pressure, being expected to have things memorized, law school is going to be a very long, horrible place to be. And it was for me. I hated every minute of it, literally hated every minute of it. If they hadn't been trying to kick me out, I think I probably would have simply withdrawn at some point. But got a stubborn streak, and they obviously didn't like me, didn't like what my perspectives were, because I didn't like to play the game of putting everything into legalese. I liked putting things in clear, concise language, and they hated that. They couldn't flunk me most of the time because, yes, I had answered the question, and yes, I had come up with the right answer, but they didn't like the fact that I answered it in a paragraph instead of 10 pages. So if you're a nonconformist, it's also a very difficult place to be. So, are there any questions?
Do you have any questions, Tina? Take off mute.
Sorry, I was muted, but no, I don't have any at the moment. I'm really interested to hear
Well,
their experience.
the other thing about law school is that you don't want to go to law school in order to be a lawyer. You want to be in law school because you actually want to practice law. You actually want to engage in representing people, sometimes people that are disgusting. I have sat across the table from serial killers, and you have to be willing to represent people that you would not want to sit across a desk from. And the other thing is that you also have to be able to I had a ritual when I would come home at night is I would put my briefcase down and I would take my dress clothes off and I would like decompensate because you have to be able to separate yourself from the very difficult emotions that you have to deal with daily. It can be very negative. It can be very toxic. And you also have to remember that even though it's very confrontational and competitive in the courtroom, that it's just a job. I could very easily go out to have drinks after a case with a prosecutor or another counsel that I had just ripped apart in court or embarrassed them in court. And the ones that take it personal, that take it too much to heart, don't last very long. There's a very high rate of drug addiction, alcoholism. If you look at the people that have been disbarred, half of them is because they screwed up with the money, and the other half is because they were addicted to something. And the number of people from my class who died in their 40s or 50s from heart disease is also very high. So it's not something that you're going to want to get into just because you think being a lawyer would be cool. It is absolutely not what it looks like on TV. Cases can go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. You can spend an hour arguing about one small piece of evidence about whether it's admissible or not. There were times I literally would bang my head on the desk just in absolute dreariness from listening to the other counsel go on about something. I just wanted him to get to the point and get it over with, but it doesn't work that way. So if you really think you want to become a lawyer, go down and sit in court and see what it's really like. That's about all I have to say. If anybody has any other questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. So I have a question.
Yeah.
So I had a question. So what kept you motivated during law school? What kept you wanting to keep on going?
Stubbornness, not wanting to appear to be a failure. I mean, I was the first person in my family to go to law school. I didn't have a lot of time to think. If I had been able to take time to think, I might have changed my mind about stuff. Just getting up and going every single day and not thinking too much. They really don't want you to think too much, but they want about the process. They just want you to think about what you're doing. And I think it probably been easier for me if I had taken advantage of some of the things that other students did, like study groups and stuff. But I just a bit too much of an introvert to have taken advantage of some of that stuff. So I actually made it harder on myself, which is stupid.
She was actually the one of the lowest graduating students in her class, but the first to be recognized by the federal bar, get into the federal bar. And that's like a very big status thing to go to get into that. Law has all these different things. Each country is different, but
I was the first one to win a case, and I was the first one to be in the bar journal.
Yeah, out of her class.
Wow.
Well, we have to go because we have another appointment at 11.
So is there one last question? Do you have one last question, Gina?
No, to be honest, I didn't know too much about the process or what law school was like. I've taken one communication law class in university, and that basically just, for the most part, discussed like the terminology and how you would communicate if you were a lawyer or you were in that type of environment. So my knowledge on the subject was pretty limited. So I was like happy to check this out.
Yeah, I took
Learn a little
like
bit
business law and real estate law in law school itself, and that was about explaining it from a perspective of somebody who's going to be a realtor or going to be in business, and these are the laws you have to be aware of. But what law school is totally different. It doesn't. I mean, we rarely talked about any of the laws. We literally learned the law by reading cases and how they were decided. And because it's all based on precedents. This is what was decided in 1700, and this is what was decided in 1800. This is what was decided in 1900. And it would build our understanding of what the current law is based on this case, and then this case, and then this case, and then this case. I think the only time I actually looked at an actual legislative law kind of thing was probably commercial law. But other than that, it was all based on one case after another and trying to memorize the names of them and what they meant. And, you know, in a courtroom, when a judge asks, when somebody, say, objects to a piece of evidence, you don't go, okay, well, the evidentiary rules are this, this, and this. You go, in Plessy versus Ferguson, this is what the court decided about this kind of evidence. And then you have to relate why that piece of evidence is just like the case now. You know, oh, they were talking about a tractor, and we're talking about a bulldozer, and this is why it's the same. And then the other guy will say, well, I've got this case, and it's not about a tractor, and it's not about a bulldozer, but it's about a front end loader. I mean, your brain it's just so different. It's so alien way of thinking.
And one last thing that we do have to go is, of course, getting a letter from somebody with the Order of Canada and the FRSC. They really look at the letters too to get into graduate school, and that's one of the things I offer that that really will make a difference. Everybody, when they start, thinks it's about the money, but it's really about those letters. And I might be a poor person, but with those letters.
No, I haven't practiced law in a very long time, but they always seem to want my opinion about things on boards. And my main job is to scare people and always talk about liability, because when you're part of your lawyer brain is always to look at liability.
Yeah, well, we better go.
All
Okay,
right.
we'll see you then.
All
All
Have
right.
a good day. Okay, bye.
Thanks again, Catherine. Thanks, Austin.
I know it's funny.
Stop recording.